Today, LEGO is the world's largest toy company, operating in over 130 countries with more than 30,000 employees and $10.8 billion in revenue in 2024. But it wasn't always this way. LEGO's path to success has been full of ups and downs. In this two-part series, I'll break down the company's journey brick by brick. In this first video, we'll explore LEGO's early history, up until the creation of the modern minifigure. LEGO's history spans over 90 years, so this series will focus on the most pivotal events from each decade that ultimately resulted in the brand we know of today. Let's get into it. To truly understand LEGO as a company, you first need to understand the company's founder, Ole Kirk Christiansen, and how his experiences, morals, and ambitions set the foundation for an expansive toy empire. Ole Kirk was born on April 7, 1891, in a small town about 12 miles or 20 kilometers away from the company's current headquarters in Billund, Denmark. The son of a poor farmer and one of 13 children, Ole Kirk wasn't exactly set up for success. But by the time he was 6 years old, he had already developed a passion for woodworking. At the age of 14, he began working as an apprentice for his older brother before joining the Danish military in 1911. In 1916, Ole Kirk returned to Billund, got married, and bought a small carpentry shop using the money he'd earned from the army. This shop, which he called the Billund Woodworking and Carpentry Shop, was focused on restoring and developing new buildings, as well as producing household furniture for the local community. In his small community, Ole Kirk's business was a near-instant success, and he quickly earned a reputation for his unending work ethic and unflinching dedication to quality. Sadly, the entire company was nearly destroyed in 1924 when two of Ole Kirk's sons, Gottfried and Karl, were tinkering in the shop. It seems that a small fire got out of control and completely burned down not only the workshop, but also the family home. Fortunately, the family was able to rebuild an even larger workshop and home by the end of the year, and by 1930, the family business was up and running, with Ole Kirk employing a small team of workers to serve his ever-growing list of clients. Gottfried would later go on to say that burning down the workshop was actually his first, quote, achievement, as it was the catalyst needed to expand the family business, and the rebuilt home still stands today, and was even immortalized by an official LEGO employee-exclusive set released in 2012. Things were looking bright for the company, but global affairs would soon throw yet another wrench into the gears when the Great Depression, which had started in the US in 1929, made its way to Denmark by 1932. Suddenly, the demand for expensive new custom furniture dried up, and Ole Kirk was put in a very difficult situation, where the work he'd been known for was simply no longer required by customers. With demand drying up and facing hard times, Ole Kirk had a choice to make: ride out the storm or change the way he did business. Since he was never afraid to take risks, Ole Kirk decided the best thing he could do to keep afloat was to pivot his company away from large, expensive items to smaller, cheaper toys, which were still affordable even during the crisis. Later in life, Ole Kirk would go on to say that, quote, "Not until the day when I said to myself, you must make a choice between carpentry and toys, did I find the real answer." That year, he founded his then unnamed company and got to work selling toys. While this decision would ultimately prove to be the right one, success didn't come overnight, and times were hard for the struggling woodworker. By the end of the year, the business was still not turning a profit and was very nearly forced to close down until Ole Kirk was able to secure a loan of roughly $21,000 in today's money to keep the doors open for just a little bit longer. After a few hard years, things were beginning to turn around, and Ole Kirk's new toys were flying off the shelves. By far the most popular was the now legendary wooden duck toy, which, much like Ole Kirk's house, was also preserved forever as an official LEGO release. In fact, it was this very duck that would go on to provide Ole Kirk with the motto for his new company and set the stage for LEGO's dedication to quality. During these hard times, Ole Kirk sadly had to lay off all of his employees over the course of several years, leaving only him and his two sons, the same two who had previously burned down the old shop. One day, his son Gottfried returned from dropping off a shipment of wooden ducks and seemed to be exceptionally proud of himself. When asked why he was in such a good mood, the young man proudly told his father that he had done something exceptionally clever, which would save the struggling company a lot of money. "How did you manage that?" the boy's father asked, and Gottfried replied, "I gave the ducks just 2 coats of varnish, not 3, as we usually do." This apparently was not what Ole Kirk wanted to hear, and he snapped back at his son. "You'll immediately fetch those ducks back, give them the last coat of varnish, pack them up, and return them to the station. And you'll do it all on your own, even if it takes you all night." Gottfried would later say that this moment taught him a serious lesson about the importance of quality. He carved this wooden sign which translates to the Lego company motto, "Only the best is good enough." This sign was hung on the wall of the shop, and copies of it still grace the walls of the Lego house in Billund to this day. By 1935, the economy in Denmark was starting to recover, and Ole Kirk had been successful enough to rehire several employees. Now, fully committed to making toys, he decided that it was time to officially brand his still unnamed company, and held a contest among his workers to come up with the best name, with the winner earning a bottle of Ole Kirk's own homemade wine. Funny enough, in the end, Ole Kirk won his own competition and chose his own submission, naming the company Lego. This was a contraction of the Danish words leg godt, meaning play well, and starting in 1936, the company began officially using their new name. Things went well for the next few years, and the company grew rapidly. However, global affairs would once again conspire against the toy maker. In 1940, Nazi Germany seized control of Denmark, placing the country under their control. While much of the day-to-day life continued as normal and the company wasn't directly impacted, things like material shortages and overall economic slowdowns certainly had an impact on the relatively young company. However, the biggest setback was still to come and had nothing to do with World War II. They say that lightning never strikes twice, but sadly the same can't be said for fires, and in 1942 Ole Kirk's second workshop was, once again, lost in a massive blaze, when a short circuit sparked an electrical fire. If the first fire 18 years earlier had been a tragedy, this one was a complete catastrophe. In the end, Ole Kirk and Lego lost the whole factory, and the company's entire stock of goods and materials, and even all of the blueprints for their products, were gone. At this point, nobody could have blamed Ole Kirk for packing up and walking away, but then we wouldn't be here talking about it, would we? Out of a sense of obligation to his workers and a never-say-die attitude, Ole Kirk decided to start over yet again and built a third factory. This new workshop was larger and more modern, featuring a full assembly line which would allow his team to produce even more toys. However, there was one toy that Ole Kirk refused to produce. The recent horrors of World War II, combined with Ole Kirk's time in the military fighting in World War I, caused him to realize that war was no game. When Lego began making toys following the Second World War, he would say that war should never be made to seem like child's play, and that Lego would have a strict no-weapons policy for the next several decades. This is why Lego doesn't make super realistic guns or certain sets such as historically accurate tanks. This is also why there are so many alternative brick brands that do. In fact, I've got an entire video that goes over Lego's history of weapons, and I'll link it in the description if you're interested. By 1945, the company had been rebuilt, the Nazis had been defeated, and things were once again looking up for Ole Kirk. However, the company's biggest challenge was yet to come, and the world would never be the same. In 1946, Ole Kirk was visiting a toy fair in Copenhagen when he saw something he'd never seen before, a plastic injection molding machine. In the 1940s, plastic was still a fairly new invention and was rapidly growing in popularity as more traditional materials such as stone, metal, and wood were still in short supply following the war. While the injection molding machine was impressive on its own, what really caught Ole Kirk's eye were the small plastic bricks that the vendor gave him as a sample of what the machine could do. These large interlocking building cubes, as they were officially called, were being developed by a British company called Kittycraft, and had been patented since 1939. Seeing these bricks for the brilliant toy that they were, and spotting room for significant improvement in their design, Ole Kirk became the very first toy maker in Denmark to buy an injection molding machine in 1947. This was no small thing either, and the machine cost more than double the company's profits from the previous year. To make sure to capitalize on this opportunity, over the next 2 years, Ole Kirk and his team went through countless prototypes, trying to improve on the original Kittycraft bricks, until in 1949 they rolled out the automatic binding brick, and the world would never be the same. It's impossible to overstate just how much of a risk this was from a business standpoint at the time, and these early bricks weren't an instant hit. In fact, sales were rather poor throughout the 1950s, but if you haven't noticed, Ole Kirk wasn't one for giving up. In 1950, Ole Kirk Christiansen, the same kid who burned down his father's shop and who skipped the last coat of varnish, was named Junior Managing Director. So remember kids, no matter how much you screw up, it's never too late to find success. Godfred spent the next decade perfecting these plastic bricks. In 1951, LEGO changed the product's name from automatic binding bricks to LEGO Mursten, which is Danish for blocks. And they also began including the LEGO logo onto all of their bricks that they created. In 1954, Godfred visited a toy exhibition in Britain where he met the purchasing manager for one of Copenhagen's largest department stores, Magasin du Nord. During their conversation, the manager commented, quote, "What an industry this is. No system of any kind whatsoever," in reference to the toy industry's complete lack of standardization. These words rang in Godfred's ears, and after returning to Billund, Denmark, he launched an exhaustive audit of each of the company's more than 200 products and discovered that there was, in fact, no system at all to what LEGO was doing. Well, that simply wouldn't do. And in 1955, Godfred and LEGO rolled out Town Plan No. 1, the very first set under the LEGO System banner, which would go on to define the company to this very day. Though these still weren't quite what we'd call modern LEGO, and these bricks aren't entirely compatible with more modern offerings. Godfred and LEGO spent the 1950s perfecting their new design and experimenting with different types of plastic until they stumbled across the perfect formula. LEGO bricks in the 1950s were primarily made out of cellulose acetate. This was before they transitioned to ABS plastic in the 60s. One of the major differences between these early bricks and the version we all know and love today is what LEGO calls clutch power, which is basically the brick's ability to stick to another brick. The early automatic binding bricks were lacking one key design feature that prevented them from truly sticking together. They had no tubes on the bottom. This meant that the bricks were able to slip and slide around, and it wasn't until LEGO developers added their signature tubes underneath that they finally cracked the case. Finally, on July 28, 1958, LEGO patented the modern brick. These earliest bricks were truly revolutionary and showed off LEGO's eternal commitment to quality. Today, these first modern bricks are still perfectly compatible with everything that rolls off LEGO's lines, highlighting just how fundamental the LEGO system has become to the company. And if you want to get your own piece of LEGO history, you can pick up a copy of the patent as a full-sized poster from the SpitBrix poster shop. There's a link on screen and also in the description below. These new bricks were an instant success, and the company was quickly able to grow to the largest it had ever been, with 140 full-time employees. Sadly, 1958 wasn't all good news for LEGO though. Shortly after submitting the patent application that would make the company a global icon, founder Ole Kirk Christiansen passed away from a heart attack at the age of 66. Today, the central square of Billund is named Ole Kirk Plads in his honor and is home to the LEGO House. The 1960s were a time of massive growth for the small Danish toy company. Now that they had perfected the LEGO brick, customers simply couldn't get enough. While the company's home of Denmark had proven to be a lucrative market, the nation's fairly small population meant that there was only so many customers that the company could reach, and so LEGO decided that it was finally time to go global. In 1961, LEGO expanded its production capabilities to North America and contracted with a company called Schwader. This company would later go on to change its name to Samsonite, which is a name familiar to anyone who's ever been in an airport. The company would be allowed to produce their own LEGO bricks at a plant in Denver, Colorado, using molds rented from the company's European factories, ensuring that every brick produced in the US would be compatible with their European counterparts. It was around this time that LEGO also bought the company's first 2 planes to help transport people and products from factory to factory. These first flights were piloted by 2 cousins named Hans Erik Christiansen and Hans Jørgen Christiansen. They were seemingly unrelated to the Christiansen family who had founded LEGO. It's just a common Danish last name. And despite sounding very similar, they're spelled a little bit differently. There was one small issue though. Billund didn't currently have an airport. So what's an enterprising company to do? Well, under Gottfred's direction, LEGO built the Billund Airport and opened it in 1964, granting the residents of Billund, Denmark, as well as neighboring cities access to it. By 1985, the small airfield had been expanded and was officially upgraded to an international airport. Today, Billund is Denmark's second busiest airport after Copenhagen. Now, the 1960s were also a period of experimentation for LEGO. Now that the company had settled on a unified design for their classic bricks, the next thought was, well, what if we made them bigger? And in 1964, LEGO and Schwader rolled out the Jumbo Brick, also known as the Kindergarten Brick. These new offerings were much larger than any bricks that LEGO had released before, and as the name implied, they were targeted towards young children for whom the tiny bricks presented a choking hazard. These bricks, though, weren't a huge success, and US production was halted after less than a decade, around 1971. Around the same time as the Jumbo bricks, LEGO rolled out another long-forgotten line, Modulex. These bricks were pretty much the exact opposite of the Kindergarten bricks, as they were much smaller than standard LEGO and came in fewer, less vibrant colors. I did a whole deep dive into the fascinating history and story behind Modulex that I'll link in the description, but the short version goes something like this. Much like his father, Ole Kirk Christiansen was a skilled architect and designer, and was in the process of designing his new home. Seeing how LEGO sets at the time were almost entirely miniature buildings, he figured that these would be a great way to create an initial layout and design. Well, he quickly realized that LEGO bricks were, in fact, not a very good representation of actual building supplies. The basic issue is that LEGO bricks are built to an unrealistic 5x5x6 ratio, which makes them incredibly difficult to translate to the real world. This inspired Gottfred to create an entirely new line of smaller bricks with a 1:1:1 scale, which would allow far more accurate and true-to-life designs. However, it was obvious to him that children wouldn't care about such things, and that these bricks would be needed to be treated very differently by the company if they were to succeed. To that end, the company sold them under the name Modulex and marketed them directly to architects and designers as an alternative to traditional design materials. Over the next several decades, Modulex would rise and fall a few times and was eventually spun off into its own separate company. Today, Modulex still exists, though you won't be able to find any of their bricks in stores as they now only create signs for office buildings. Seriously, the story of how these tiny bricks went from a niche LEGO offering to one of the world's largest sign makers is fascinating and kind of odd, so be sure to check out that video after this one. Among all of these wild experiments, there was at least one that proved to be a massive success and would change the way that LEGO designs sets to this day: the wheel. While today LEGO wheels come in all shapes and sizes, these original ones were a little bit less varied. Regardless, they were an instant hit with fans, and the company has never looked back. As a fun fact, today LEGO produces more tires than anyone else in the world. For more context, LEGO makes an astonishing 388 million tires every year, which is more than double that of second place Michelin's 166 million tires. By the end of the 1960s, LEGO had become a global sensation, and fans from around the world were eager to learn more about the company and to see how their favorite toys were being made. In the mid-60s, more than 20,000 visitors a year were making their way to the company's main factory. This was, as you can imagine, not ideal for a large-scale industrial factory full of expensive and dangerous machines. Something needed to be done. Gottfred was always on the lookout for new ways of growing the business, and so with this, Gottfred had an idea of creating a real-life Legoland, where customers and fans could explore all that LEGO had to offer. This would allow the factory to focus on making bricks, while giving visitors a handcrafted experience like no other. To design the very first Legoland, Gottfred reached out to a man named Arnold Vautrup, who was the chief designer at a department store in Copenhagen and the man behind the city's most imaginative sales window. When the park opened on June 7, 1968, the response was immediate, as LEGO fans flooded the park. In that first season of operation, Legoland hosted more than 625,000 guests. That was more than double what the park had planned on, and for a bit of perspective, was more than 10% of Denmark's entire population of just under 5 million people at the time. The first day was so busy that LEGO's marketing director, Helge Torp, was stuck washing dishes alongside 2 other executives in the park restaurant's kitchen. Since then, Legoland has shown little sign of slowing down, and the entire history of LEGO's theme parks is a fascinating story. If you'd like to see a full deep dive into this topic in the future, be sure to let me know down in the comments. Now, the 1960s would see one other change to LEGO's roster when the company rolled out Duplo in 1969. It seems like the idea of the jumbo bricks had been popular enough, as parents were eager for LEGO bricks that could be played with by toddlers. But the jumbo bricks were simply too large and expensive to buy in bulk. Today, Duplo is an essential part of LEGO's business, and is likely the first experience that young fans will have with LEGO. With the meteoric rise of LEGO in North America, LEGO decided that it simply made sense to create a US subsidiary to help streamline production and distribution across the US and Canada. In 1973, LEGO founded LEGO Systems Incorporated in Connecticut. This first factory was initially simply a packaging and distribution center for Duplo, but it would expand over the years, eventually becoming North America's largest LEGO molding factory by 1980. Also in 1973, Ole Kirk Christiansen stepped down as head of LEGO to become chairman of the board of directors of LEGO System. He would continue to play a pivotal role in shaping the company over the next several years until his son, Ole Kirk Christiansen, became CEO in 1979. That same year, LEGO changed its logo, which is something the company had done repeatedly over the decades, by dropping the word system and creating a much more minimalist, streamlined look, which is almost identical to the version we still see today. By the mid-1970s, LEGO's brand and image were cemented in people's heads, and the world simply couldn't get enough LEGO bricks. While LEGO has always been about creativity and building whatever your heart desires, the sets themselves had all focused almost exclusively on homes and cities. While builders could create a wide array of police stations, train stations, and houses, there was one thing that even the biggest LEGO city was lacking: people. By 1974, LEGO had begun releasing a line of sets called Homemakers, which were built to a completely different scale than most standard sets. These builds featured detailed rooms and houses and were large enough to accommodate small dolls. The only issue was that LEGO didn't make any. That is, until 1974's set simply called Family, which was released to a mixed reception at first. While LEGO fans were genuinely happy to finally get some plastic people, the scale of these figures simply didn't match with the vast majority of LEGO sets, and the figures were seen as fairly niche. In fact, some diehard fans even considered them to not be real LEGO. Well, those complaints were heard loud and clear by LEGO designers, and in 1975, the company released something a bit closer to what fans had been hoping for. Set 370, Police Headquarters, was far from the first police station that LEGO had ever released, but it's remembered today as the first LEGO set to contain something like a modern minifigure. These static figures were almost the same size as modern minifigures, but lacked arms, a face, or moving legs. These were an instant smash hit, and LEGO quickly realized that they had a brand-defining icon on their hands. It just needed a little bit longer in the oven to get to its final state. 1977 saw LEGO take one of its biggest, most ambitious swings when it began rolling out the LEGO Expert Builder line. These sets were meant to be larger, more complicated builds, designed for fans who grew up on LEGO but were now looking for something a little bit more challenging. While these new sets barely resembled LEGO at all, builders loved them, and the line was here to stay. However, the biggest challenge to come to LEGO in the 1970s happened in 1978, when LEGO released set number 600, Police Patrol. With only 16 pieces, this set was just one of a dozen builds released around the time and would easily have been forgotten if not for this: the very first modern minifigure. This little guy came with movable arms and legs, and even a printed face. At the time, there was no way to know just how much of a global icon that yellow face would become, but this is only half of the story, because LEGO would never be the same after this. In this next video, we'll explore how LEGO took these foundations and built a global empire, and also how they nearly lost everything again. Click here right now to watch, and be sure to subscribe to catch all of my newest LEGO videos.